introduce us, Madeline.
Okay. Hi, and welcome to Teacher Talk from Between Two Teachers. Teacher Talk is when we get together with someone else and talk about being a teacher. I'm Madeline Cronenberg.
And I'm Consuelo Lara.
And I once again want to say we are speaking to you from the ancestral and sacred ground of the Chochenyo Karkin Ohlone people. And we always give recognition to that. Today, we're going to start our interviews of candidates who are running for the West Contra Costa Unified School Districts before in one of our interviews, and that at that time was in his role as the president of the Teachers Union. And now he's no longer the president of the Teachers Union. He is a candidate for District 4 in West Contra Costa. And so here he is, Demetrio Gonzalez-Hoy.
Welcome, Demetrio.
Thank you. Thank you both for having me in your amazing channel and for being the first candidate you guys have invited. I'm excited to see, the following ones and, share a little bit of why I'm running and a little bit of my story. I know you guys know, but everybody who listens to your channel, I would love to share that.
We are so excited to have you. I want you to notice that I brought you back into the pandemic times here. We're in 1918. You're
Yeah.
So there's really there's not just 3 of teachers here, there's really 4 teachers here because she's here too. So.
Okay.
So we're going to begin. You got started in education.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Madeline. So I'm going to go back a little bit farther. So I came to the United States when I was 14 years old. I didn't speak any English or very, very little. And at the time, my school and my district, I moved to Northern San Diego. My school was not equipped to support an English language learner. So they actually put me into a special education class. But there were 2 teachers at my school who took it upon themselves to teach me English. They heard about me, and after school for months, they actually helped me and taught me English. And it was because of them and honestly the support my family gave me that I was able to succeed through high school and through college. And I never forgot that. One of them is still a good friend of mine. She actually came to my wedding a year ago. And honestly, I owe them, my path. Later in college, I was actually studying political science and linguistics. And on my last year in college, my best friend who was studying to be a teacher told me about a program called Teach for America, which places newly graduates from college into Title I schools throughout the United States to be teachers. So I decided to do that because at the time I wasn't sure I wanted to go into politics. I wasn't sure of what my path was going to be. And I'd always been curious about teaching. So I decided to do it at the time. I was placed in Richmond. I became a second grade bilingual teacher at the time at Bayview Elementary School in San Pablo. And my journey there was very interesting as I was becoming to learn how to be a teacher. I also started to see a lot of the same issues that I went through in my own educational career of struggling to learn English and a system that couldn't support me. I was starting to see that my own students were going through. So I started asking a lot of questions of why is it that we teach the program that we do? Why is it that we don't provide all the supports for families and students that we can? And no one really could give me those answers. So that actually led me into advocacy. At the time, I decided to join my union, United Teachers of Richmond. I became a rep for the first time, and I started advocating through that. And I started to see for the first time the power unions had, especially teachers unions, in advocating for what kids need. A lot of people think of teachers unions and they don't think like, oh, they only advocate for what adults need. And it's so not true, because I was starting to see how I could personally advocate and use that influence that they carry with them for kids. A couple years later, I decided to run for president of the teachers union. At the time, I wasn't thinking that I was going to win. I wanted to raise issues around being centered, student-centered, and some of the issues that I had learned about in the last few years I taught. And Marissa, who's our current president now, and I won. She was my vice president, and I did 2 terms as president of United Teachers of Richmond. And in the last 4 years, we have done, I think, even though there's so much work that still needs to be done, I think that we did some amazing strides in the retention of staff and supporting some of our families and students in our district, and hopefully making things better in a lot of our schools. So that's a little bit of how I got here. And right now I am still a teacher in West Contra Costa. And Madeline, like you mentioned, I'm running for Area 4, which I live with my wife. And my wife, I don't know if you guys know this, but she is a 4th generation teacher in West Contra Costa. Just recently, well, not recently, but a few months ago, we found her mom's certificate of employment for West County. It was half a page. And one of the sentences in it said that if she got pregnant, she would get fired. And it's just amazing how far we've gone, right? And just 3 generations from that to the contract that we have now, which is like over 400 pages, right? It's incredible. So even though
Well, one of these
sorry.
teachers in your lineage probably taught with this teacher here.
Probably.
Maybe we could find her, because we're trying to find out who she is.
Probably,
Nobody was teaching in 1917. You think about 1918.
Talk about homegrown. There's definitely homegrown teachers, right?
Yeah, and they're the ones that center me to the history, right? Because I've only been here for 8 years, right? But they're the ones that tell me, right? But you got to know this, you got to remember this, you got to learn this, right? And thanks to them, I've been able to, center the work that we do, because history is so important in everything we do in education.
Right.
A lot of people forget that.
Yeah. I have another question about TFA.
Yeah.
And I'm curious about what how you felt about it, and if there was something that happened, what happened, and how you feel about it now. In terms of, if you could speak a little bit more about that.
Yeah. So, I'm thankful that that's how I got into this work, right? I think that I wouldn't have become a teacher. I probably wouldn't be in this advocacy, in this advocacy position if it wasn't for that. So I always like to share my history of how I became a teacher and say that I was TFA, because that's how I got here. But at the same time, the program has a lot of faults. I have been a huge critic of TFA in the last few years, because a lot of the actions they take nationally, including how, a lot of the work that they do in the national level is to advocate for the privatization of education. And those are the pieces that I just do not agree with. Now looking back, right, becoming a teacher in 3 weeks, because that's the training that you get over the summer. It's not whatsoever how it should be, right? Especially in our lowest income communities, which is where TFA is, right? So even though I think that right now they are closing a gap of lack of teachers, in the best world scenario, to me, TFA wouldn't exist, because we wouldn't have untrained teachers supporting our students that need the most support. Right. And unfortunately, a lot of us from TFA come from very privileged backgrounds. And as newly graduated students from college, like, we don't really know much different. So it took me a long time to really learn, right, about my own privilege, right, which was not really taught at the time by the program. And this white savior mentality that they frame on you, right, of you are going to go and save all these children that have been hurt by the system and hurt by these so bad teachers over time. And I was in that mentality for a while, right? And I had to realize, like, it's not, that's a very privileged way of thinking, right? Because there's so much more behind the educational system that exists in our areas, right? So much that hurts it, so much that affects it, so much that our students go through on every day that creates the academic achievement that exists. So to answer your question, I don't feel very positive about it anymore. I think in our area, they have done a lot of growth, and I would never blame a new teacher for being part of the program ever, because I was one of them, right? But what I would always ask of them, and I meet with them every year, well, as I was president of UTR, I would meet with them every year as they were newly hired in the district, and I would tell them, you gotta open your mind, right, and actually listen into this community, listen to your colleagues, listen to your students, what they go through. And a lot of them are incredible. I mean, listen, like a lot of teachers from TFA have done incredible work in many places, right? I mean, I was just thinking, you know, the vice president of the Oakland Education Association is an alum, TFA alum, like I was. The vice president of San Jose Teacher Association was. The president of UTLA, right, was TFA alum. So, I mean, there's a lot of us that I think could say have seen the light of what it really is like. So I hope that answers your question. Maybe I went a little long, but I hope.
No, that's a really good point. And I'm really, really glad you brought up the white savior mentality, because I'll just tell you, one of the other people who we've had as an interviewee here is my son, Adam, who moved to New Orleans because he knew that school system had been decimated by Hurricane Katrina. So he applied to the TFA of New Orleans, which was something called Teach NOLA. And they completely rejected him because he knew how to teach. That was the reason. He had a degree in teaching, and that made him ineligible to be a teacher for them. And that showed me the savior. He was part of the problem because he had become a teacher, as opposed to one of them, a person who was not a teacher. Here he was, he had his credentials, he had to become a sub, work through the subsystem for basically a charter to hire him.
Wow.
And so it just, the white savior mentality is pervasive through their system. And I think, especially now when we're looking at all of these issues around race and asking everyone to rethink their perspective, that's a big one that we don't look at very much.
Yeah.
Right? And I'm glad we called it out here. I really am.
Yeah.
But it brings us to the next part of that, which is in fact charter schools. Right? So you've had growth in your charter school position, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So tell us about that.
Yeah, and just to kind of finish the last topic, you know, I would say that the program needs to change quite a bit, right? But I think that we also have some TFA teachers in our district who are incredible, right? And I think that they have to continue to speak up about the challenges of the program, because that's the only way that will ever change that, right? So it's on us that have gone through the program to really share the realities, right, of it. So
honestly, remember there was a bill last year, the Weber bill? No, it wasn't the Weber bill.
It was what's her name? Gosh, I'm starting to forget.
I'm sorry, I forgot it too. But it wasn't Ms. Weber. It was anyway. It's a different assembly member, and her bill was to require to not have non-credentialed teachers assigned to your lowest performing schools, right? Your most vulnerable children. And that was opposed by TFA. Right? And it just seemed to be, so that's like, because then there's no one to save.
Mm-hmm.
That's right.
Yeah.
Okay. So
they looked at it, it was an attack on them and their business model.
Yeah.
But
it's linked together. The charter issue.
Right. But you would have thought they would come in and say, yeah, you know, ultimately we don't want to have to be serving the children who are the most vulnerable. It shouldn't be us with 3 weeks training. It really should be the experienced teachers, and they should get on the side of the children instead of on the side of their white savior mentality.
Yeah. And I mean, it ties to the next piece, right? Because the teachers that go into the program, it's not their fault, right? They're looking for a way to get into teaching. They're looking for a way to create change, right? Because that's
Definitely
really
that.
one of the prerequisites, right? People who want to create change in their communities. So I get that. It's not their fault, it's the program. And that's the same thing with charter schools, right? It's not the family's fault who move into a charter school. They're looking for the best education for their kids. But the reality is that the charter industry has
No.
really grown into something very different than what they actually say that they do, right? And my experience, like you said, I have had a complete change of mindset when it comes to charter schools. When I started teaching, especially, and in a few years after, my thoughts on charter schools were very, very positive, right? I drank the Kool-Aid of what the industry tells you of we're gonna provide better education than the school that you teach at, right, or the school that's next door, and we're gonna be able to help the kids that you help better than the next year teacher, right, or the next program, whatever. And they of course show the worst parts of district data, right? They pick the worst pieces, they share that. Of course, they scare you. So at the time, I was my third year teaching, and at school, sorry, when I was mentioning I taught a baby elementary school. We were a school of about 740 students. We were actually heading in a good trajectory, in a good direction. We were average in our district, which is nothing to be excited about, but we were heading in the right direction, both in ELA and math. And a charter school opened up the hill. And I actually even referred some families to the charter school of kids who were like, you need more, the student needs more support. The student would do well at that school, right? So they don't fall through the cracks, because I'm seeing symbols of issues that could lead to that. So I don't want that. I want what's best for my kids. What really happened was that this charter school really destroyed a lot of the work that we've done in our school, because it was just down the hill. The school didn't take our special education students. They didn't take our low-level English language learners, right? Because there's levels from depending on where they are in their development of English. So they didn't take our lowest level English language learners. They didn't take a lot of our African-American families. So what was left for us in the next 2 years was we had to rebuild a school because of that. Right now, Baby Elementary School has 410 students. No one who I worked with 4 years ago at Bayview is left there now. Not a
No
single
one.
staff member, except for a parent volunteer, is left in this whole school. And this was the biggest elementary school at the time in our whole district. It has a high number of special education students. It has a high number of English language learners. And that charter school that opened is the opposite. They have very low levels of English language learners. They do have English language learners, but they're the high level ones, right? They have very low level of special ed, and the special ed students that they have are really speech and some other special education services that are not as deep as level 2 or level 3 in special education, right? So that charter school opening, even though maybe it created an environment of learning for the students that went there, what happened was that it destroyed the educational world of 450 others. We lost teachers, we lost funding, we lost our programs that were supporting us moving in the right direction. And like I've mentioned, because it became such a difficult place to work in, because it was so stressful of the lack of support, not a single teacher that worked with me is left. And when people hear this, they'll be like, well, that's the district's fault for not taking commands of the school, right? That is the district's fault for not providing supports when knowing that was going to happen. To some extent, sure, maybe the district could have done more, but how do you support a school that is already sinking, right? With lack of funding, because it's the same funding, actually less, because you just lost kids,
Right.
right? How do you do that, right? Without really knowing what's going to happen. So that experience showed me what actually happens when charter schools open in communities like ours, right? And now, after years of looking at data, district data, and being involved in every committee, as you guys know, I have really seen and dug deep into who do our charter schools serve, right? One of the charter schools that I think is used an example all the time in our district, making waves, that I used to really look up to. Once you really look at their data, you see that they serve a tiny population of special education students. They don't serve any newcomers or any low-level English language learners, right? And they have all these additional supports and resources from philanthropy, right? Which we don't have. So of course they're gonna succeed in opening a small school when you have all of that, right? And we actually serve every student and we don't turn anyone away, right? Because that's what we're supposed to do. So that's what's opened my eyes. That's why I was in full support of the resolution that Trustee Lara actually passed in collaboration with her colleagues about, you know, a moratorium on charter schools in our district, because in the last 5 years, we've seen a 200% increase in charter schools in West Contra Costa, right? And then we are blamed for every wrong issue that happens in our district, yet we're losing $30 million a year because of that. To me, none of that makes sense, right? And now I'm going, you know, and going on, but it's really terrifying, right? And people think it's like, oh, it's like a adult issue, right? People just don't like us because we're gonna take jobs away. That's nothing to do with jobs. To me, it has never been about jobs. To me, it has never been about adult issues. To me, it's always been about kids, because I saw in my classroom how they didn't accept the kids that I referred to, right? And some of my kids, they get accepted, like I think 2 or 3 of them, and they did great, and I'm so proud of them. But they didn't take everybody who we pushed to go there, right? And that, what did that show me, right? So
yeah, exactly.
To create inequity, more inequity in their schools. That's true. And Demetrio, I just want to tell you that the fact that you came from that perspective and you made that journey to where you are now, I think is what makes you really valuable on the board. That perspective, that understanding of, you know, and then that fact that you can, you know, change. You understand that you can learn from these things and change your perspective. That's so important, because there's a lot of people stuck. They're just stuck in their ways no matter what. and they're not, no matter how much reality you show them, they're, you know, like you said, it's like they drank the Kool-Aid and they're not going to change. So to me, that's one of the reasons I definitely think you're excellent for the school board, for sure.
thank you. That means a lot.
That's a great story. Now, do you want to do, this is an opportunity for you to speak to the good voters of District 4. So whatever you'd like to say to them who may be watching, or those who would like to support you, who are who want to help you in your outreach to the voters.
Yeah, thank you, Madeline. Sorry, you froze for a second. Yes, absolutely. First of all, thank you for the time. And I know I get hear about this, but I hope it shows how much I care about all these issues. And of course, you know, charter schools is just one small piece, right? But I've come to learn in the last 8 years so much about advocacy, so much about our district, so much about our students and our families. You know, like as an immigrant to the United States, I always felt like I was missing that place I could call home. You always get that question of, where are you from, right? Like, where's your hometown? And I always struggled answering that, right? My hometown is Puebla, Mexico, right? I mean, and now I actually say my hometown is Richmond, California, right? Because I have felt like I found, you know, the place that I love. I love this community so much. I mean, I don't have to speak for my wife, how much she loves it for being here for so long, right? She went through our schools, and I've learned so much from her experience and seeing her teach. All my closest friends, they're all teachers. I was laughing with someone the other day. I'm starting to not know anybody who's not a teacher or a parent in our district. I was like, I need to start branching out to other things that, but because of that, the next 2 years are going to be 2 of the most difficult years this districts have ever had to face. Apart from being in this very difficult time of being in a pandemic, and every decision the next board makes about returning to school might mean the life or death of staff and students. We're also in a huge budget deficit still, right? And in a year, we have to make another $20 million in cuts. There's so much uncertainty. And on top of that, right, we have our superintendent. We don't know what's going to happen with him either. And one of the biggest responsibilities of the board is the hiring and kind of holding accountable of a superintendent. So we want to also, I want to know, right, what's going to happen with him, right? And if the board decides to let him go, how that process is going to look, keep him, then how are we going to hold decisions accountable and priorities? So having a board that knows what they're doing, that have been involved in our schools and know the successes and also the weaknesses of our system is critical for the next 2 years. So I hope that, like, as people hear more about me, they hear what's important to me, the recruitment and retention of staff, our African-American and English language learners, you know, the inclusion of families and students and educators and staff into every decision that we make. As I share all that in the campaign, I hope people will you know, allow me to be privileged enough to get elected and support them and continue on the amazing steps of folks like you guys that have shown, right, how to lead an example and with love for our community, because there's a million things that we need to do better, but there's a million things that we also need to strengthen that we're doing well.
Right.
And a lot of the people are running who have never been in a school before don't know, right? And it's going to be a huge learning curve in the middle of an emergency. So I hope that as people watch this, they'll join our campaign, and it's a grassroots campaign. I mean, we are raising $20 at a time, right? $15 at a time. We're not getting the large checks that some of other folks are going to get, you know, and ultimately, you know, my team is made of teachers, parents, and students, right? And I couldn't wish for more. So no matter what happens, I'm going to push forward with our values and honesty and positive mindset and listening to the community. So, and thank you again for allowing me, guys, to come and share.
Oh, wow. Thank
Well, it's
you.
our pleasure to have you. And we're going to continue with other candidates during during this incredible election season. And it's going to be quite the season anyhow, as we're all beginning. Once Labor Day comes, it's going to go super fast. So thank you for coming. Did you want to say anything, Consuelo?
Just, you know, I really think that in terms of building positive relationships, I'm so glad you said that about be positive and, you know, building relationships. And that is what it's about. We know how, that's what leadership is to me. That's true leadership. So I'm you know, I'm rooting for you for sure. Thank you for
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you all. And thank you, Demetrio, for coming. And now I'm going to stop recording.